In the year 1910, Berlin was one of the most advanced cities on Earth, yet almost no one living there understood that they were standing inside the final calm before a collapse that would tear their world apart. Electric lights illuminated streets that had once been dark, factories roared with productivity, and cafes buzzed with confidence about progress, science, and national strength. But beneath this modern surface lay a pressure building so quietly that it felt invisible. What makes this moment unsettling is that life did not feel fragile to those living it, because jobs existed, trains ran on time, and the future seemed predictable, even bright. Ordinary people planned marriages, careers, and savings without realizing that within just a few years, many of those plans would be erased by forces far beyond their control. Berlin in 1910 was not a city waiting for destruction, but a city convinced it had mastered its own destiny, which is exactly why what followed would be so devastating. For the working population, daily life in Berlin revolved around discipline, routine, and a growing dependence on industrial systems that promised stability but delivered constant strain. Long hours in factories, crowded housing blocks, and strict social expectations shaped lives that were orderly yet exhausting, leaving little space for questioning the direction the city was heading. Wages were improving for some, but inequality remained sharp, and resentment simmered quietly between social classes that rarely mixed beyond necessity. Newspapers spoke of national pride and technological triumph, while conversations in workers' homes focused on rising prices, job insecurity, and the fear of falling behind. Even leisure felt structured, controlled by time clocks and schedules that reflected a society obsessed with efficiency. People trusted institutions to protect them, believing that modern systems would prevent chaos, not realizing that those same systems were tightly bound to political ambitions that would soon demand unimaginable sacrifice. As the years crept forward, Berlin's confidence hardened into certainty, and certainty slowly replaced caution, because belief in strength became inseparable from belief in destiny. Public life grew louder with demonstrations of order and unity, while private life absorbed the stress of rising expectations and unspoken fears. Families encouraged discipline in children not simply as virtue but as survival, teaching them to respect authority and suppress doubt. Workplaces demanded loyalty and productivity, reinforcing the idea that personal worth was measured by contribution to the machine of progress. Political discussions became sharper, more nationalistic, yet still felt distant from everyday consequences, allowing people to engage with them as ideas rather than warnings. Most Berliners did not imagine themselves as participants in history, but as observers of a powerful nation moving forward, unaware that observation itself had become a form of complicity in the momentum building around them. Beneath the surface of unity, fractures widened quietly, dividing the city along lines of class, ideology, and access to security. Workers sensed that prosperity was uneven, intellectuals debated the direction of society, and officials doubled down on structure to maintain control over a population growing restless beneath its obedience. Housing shortages, labor disputes, and social tensions were treated as temporary obstacles rather than symptoms of deeper instability. Entertainment and culture flourished, offering distraction and pride, reinforcing the belief that Berlin represented the future of Europe. Yet this cultural brilliance masked a dangerous imbalance, because confidence without restraint breeds vulnerability. The city did not slow down to question itself, and in that refusal to pause, Berlin carried itself steadily toward a breaking point that would soon demand more than obedience, more than loyalty, and far more than anyone was prepared to give. By the early years of the new decade, the pace of life in Berlin felt faster, heavier, as if the city itself was being pulled forward by forces it could no longer control. Industrial growth intensified competition, not only between nations but within households, where stability depended on maintaining employment in an economy increasingly tied to political ambition. Conversations at dinner tables rarely mentioned war directly, yet they circled around ideas of duty, honor, and national purpose, quietly normalizing sacrifice long before it was demanded. Schools reinforced discipline and pride, shaping young minds to view discipline as virtue and questioning as weakness, while public ceremonies celebrated unity without addressing the costs hidden behind it. Life appeared orderly, but that order relied on constant pressure, creating a fragile balance that could collapse under strain. What made this moment dangerous was not ignorance, but misplaced confidence, the belief that preparation and structure could contain any crisis. As international tensions escalated, Berlin continued its routines with remarkable calm because disruption still felt theoretical rather than personal. People trusted leaders to manage conflict responsibly, assuming that modern diplomacy and rational decision-making would prevent catastrophe. This trust allowed daily life to continue uninterrupted, even as alliances hardened and rhetoric sharpened beyond repair. Factories expanded production, transportation networks grew denser, and the city's reliance on these systems deepened, tying survival more closely to forces beyond individual influence. The closer Berlin moved toward destruction, the less visible the danger became, concealed by normalcy and reinforced by tradition. When the moment finally arrived, it would not feel like a sudden shock, but like the inevitable release of pressure that had been building silently for years, carrying the city into a future shaped not by progress, but by loss, endurance, and irreversible change. In the final years before everything unraveled, Berlin existed in a strange state of emotional contradiction, outwardly stable yet inwardly restless, because the promise of greatness demanded constant reassurance. People spoke of the nation's future with pride, but also with an urgency that betrayed underlying anxiety, as if repeating belief might make it stronger. Ordinary citizens sensed that something significant was approaching, though few could articulate what it was or how it would change their lives. The city's efficiency, once a source of comfort, now felt relentless, leaving little room for reflection or hesitation. Every system pushed forward, reinforcing momentum rather than caution, and in doing so removed opportunities to slow down. What history makes clear is that destruction often grows within order itself, nurtured by confidence and carried forward by routine. When the break finally came, it did not feel sudden to those living through it because the groundwork had been laid so thoroughly that resistance seemed impossible. Berlin's transformation was not driven by a single event, but by years of unexamined assumptions, rigid discipline, and faith in institutions that could not protect those they depended on them. The city that once believed it had secured its future found itself consumed by demands it could no longer meet and by consequences it could not escape. In hindsight, the warning signs were everywhere, hidden in plain sight within normal days and ordinary conversations. Berlin did not destroy itself through chaos, but through unwavering commitment to a direction it never paused to question, proving that the most devastating collapses often begin with confidence rather than fear. As the consequences of those unexamined choices began to unfold, Berlin's sense of inevitability replaced its former optimism because events were now moving faster than individuals could comprehend or influence. The structures that once provided stability demanded obedience without offering clarity, and ordinary people adjusted by narrowing their focus to immediate survival rather than long-term hopes. Families adapted quietly, rationing resources, suppressing questions, and clinging to routines that offered familiarity in a world becoming increasingly unpredictable. The confidence that once filled public spaces thinned into determination, a collective resolve to endure rather than to understand. What had been pride slowly transformed into obligation, and obligation into endurance, reshaping the city's emotional landscape. Berlin's people did not suddenly become different, but the context around them hardened, forcing adaptation not through choice but necessity.